Daniel Hayes had hosted dozens of elite parties before, but never one like this. The ballroom shimmered under golden chandeliers, crystal glasses catching the light as soft music floated through the air. Wealthy guests in perfectly tailored suits and elegant gowns moved gracefully across the marble floor, their laughter blending with quiet conversations about business, power, and influence. Everything was exactly as Daniel liked it: flawless, controlled, impressive. Standing near the center of the room, he adjusted his cufflinks, scanning the crowd with quiet satisfaction. This night mattered. Important investors were present, influential names filled the guest list, and every detail had been carefully planned. Then suddenly, the doors opened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But somehow, it changed everything. A woman stepped inside. At first, only a few people noticed. Then more heads turned. Conversations softened, then stopped completely. The soft music continued, but the room itself seemed to fall into a strange silence. She walked forward slowly, effortlessly, as if she belonged there more than anyone else. Her presence was striking, not just because of her beauty, but because of the calm confidence she carried. Her posture was straight, her measured, her expression composed yet unreadable. She didn't look around nervously like someone entering an unfamiliar world. She looked like she owned it. A deep, elegant gown flowed around her with every step, catching the light in a way that made it impossible to look away. Her hair framed her face perfectly, and there was a quiet strength in her eyes, something that made people stare longer than they intended. Whispers began to ripple across the room. Who is she? Is she on the guest list? I've never seen her before. Even the most composed guests couldn't hide their curiosity. Some tried to act normal, lifting their glasses or returning to conversation, but their eyes kept drifting back to her. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. Step by step, she moved deeper into the crowd. And then, Daniel saw her. For a brief moment, his expression didn't change. His face remained calm, professional, practiced. But something in his eyes shifted. Confusion. Then tension. Then something far more unsettling. His body went still. The glass in his hand paused mid-air as he stared across the room, his gaze locked on the woman who had just entered. It didn't make sense. It couldn't be. Yet the more he looked, the harder it became to breathe. Around him, people were still whispering, still trying to understand who she was. Why her presence felt so powerful. But Daniel wasn't wondering who she was. He was trying to understand how she was standing there at all. The woman continued walking toward the center of the ballroom, her expression calm, untouched by the attention surrounding her. And as the distance between them slowly disappeared, the past Daniel had carefully buried began to rise, uninvited, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Before that night, before the silence she had just created with a single step into the ballroom, she had lived a very different life. Her name was Elena Hayes. There was a time when Elena was known only as Daniel Hayes's wife, a quiet presence beside a rising man. She had never cared for attention, never felt the need to impress strangers or fit into circles that valued appearance over sincerity. She preferred simple evenings, soft conversations, and a life built on genuine connection rather than status. In the early years of their marriage, Elena had been his strongest support. When Daniel was still building his name, working late nights and facing constant pressure, she stood beside him without complaint. She managed their home, encouraged him during failures, and celebrated even his smallest victories as if they were her own. She believed in him, completely. But as Daniel's world grew, something in him began to change. Success introduced him to a different life. Elite parties, influential connections, powerful conversations. This became his new normal. And slowly, almost without noticing, he began to see Elena not as his strength, but as someone who didn't belong in that world. At first, it was subtle. You wouldn't enjoy it, he would say gently when mentioning an event. It's just business people, nothing interesting. Elena would smile and nod, trusting his words, choosing not to question him. She never insisted. She never demanded to be included. In her mind, supporting him also meant respecting his space. But over time, the excuses became habits. He stopped asking altogether. Invitations came and went, But Elena's name was no longer part of them. When colleagues asked about his wife, Daniel would answer briefly, sometimes changing the subject before it went any further. It wasn't just distance, it was quiet dismissal. The man who once valued her presence now seemed almost uncomfortable with it. Elena began to notice the shift in small, painful ways. The conversations grew shorter. The warmth in his voice faded. Even at home, there was a distance that hadn't existed before. He was present, yet far away, his mind always somewhere else, in a world she had never been allowed to enter. And then came the moments that hurt the most. Subtle comments about appearance. Gentle suggestions that she modernize her style. Remarks disguised as advice, but carrying something sharper beneath them. You should try to fit in a little more. People notice these things. He never raised his voice. He never openly insulted her. But sometimes, silence and indifference cut deeper than harsh words. Elena didn't argue. She simply became quieter, smaller, invisible in a life she had helped build. And without realizing it, Daniel had already started living a life where she no longer belonged. The breaking point came on a night that was meant to celebrate Daniel's greatest success. It was another grand event, brighter, louder, more important than the rest. For the first time in years, Elena had been invited. Not by Daniel, but by one of his colleagues who had warmly insisted she attend. She hesitated, but something inside her wanted to try. That evening, she stood at the edge of the same world Daniel had chosen over her. The room felt unfamiliar, but she carried herself with quiet dignity, hoping, perhaps for the last time, that she still had a place beside him. At first, Daniel looked surprised to see her. Not pleased. Not proud. Just uncomfortable. He walked toward her, his smile tight, his voice low. "You should have told me you were coming." Elena held his gaze gently. "I thought it would be nice to be here, with you." For a brief second, something unreadable crossed his face. Then he glanced around, noticing a few people watching. And that was when it happened. "This isn't really your scene, Elena," he said quietly, but not quietly enough. "You'll feel out of place." The words were simple, but the effect was not. A couple standing nearby fell silent. Someone turned slightly, pretending not to listen, but they were listening. Elena felt it. Not just the words, but the meaning behind them. Out of place. In his world. In his life. She didn't argue. She didn't react. She simply nodded. And in that moment, something inside her shifted, calmly, completely, and permanently. That night, she went home alone. By morning, she was gone. No dramatic confrontation. No desperate explanations. Just a quiet decision made with absolute clarity. Time passed. At first, it was difficult. The silence, the unfamiliar independence, the need to rebuild everything from the ground up. But Elena didn't break. She grew. Step by step, she began to rediscover herself, not as someone's wife, but as her own person. She pursued work she had once set aside, learned new skills, and stepped into spaces she had once avoided. Confidence replaced hesitation. Strength replaced doubt. She refined her presence, not to impress others, but to reflect who she had become. Her elegance was no longer quiet and hidden. It was powerful, intentional, unshakable. And over time, the woman who once felt out of place became someone who could walk into any room and belong everywhere. The night of Daniel Hayes' most prestigious event arrived like a statement of everything he had built: power, influence, and a world designed to admire him. The guest list was exclusive. The atmosphere, flawless. Every detail reflected success. And then, she arrived. The same doors that had once opened for him alone now welcomed a presence that quietly took control of the entire room. Elena walked in with calm, effortless grace. There was no hesitation in her, no trace of the woman who had once stood uncertain at the edges of this world. Her elegance was undeniable, her confidence natural, her presence impossible to ignore. Heads turned instantly. Conversations slowed, then stopped. No one recognized her. To them, she was simply a woman of striking beauty and quiet power, someone important, someone intriguing, someone worth noticing. But to Daniel, she was something else entirely. Across the room, his breath caught. This time, there was no confusion. Only realization. And regret. He watched her as she moved through the crowd, acknowledging greetings with a soft, composed smile. People were drawn to her without understanding why. She didn't try to impress anyone. Yet she stood out more than anyone else in the room. Everything he had once dismissed now commanded attention. Whispers spread quickly. Who is she? Do you know her? She seems familiar. And then, like a ripple turning into a wave, the truth began to surface. Elena. The name moved from one person to another, growing louder with each repetition. Elena Hayes. Shock followed immediately. Expressions changed. Eyes widened. Conversations dissolved into disbelief. The woman they had overlooked, the one who had never belonged in their world, now stood at its center. Daniel could no longer stay where he was. He moved toward her, each step heavier than the last. When they finally stood face to face, the noise of the room seemed to fade into the background. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elena looked at him calmly, her expression composed, her eyes steady, no anger, no bitterness. Just clarity. Daniel searched her face, as if trying to find the woman he once knew. But she was no longer there. I didn't expect to see you here, he said quietly, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Elena's lips curved into a faint, polite smile. I was invited. There was a pause, thick with everything left unsaid. You look, he began, then stopped, unable to find words that felt sufficient. She didn't help him. She didn't need to. For the first time, Daniel felt what she once had, uncertain, out of place, and completely unprepared. I didn't realize, he continued, his voice softer now, edged with something close to regret. Elena met his gaze without hesitation. You didn't realize a lot of things. Her tone wasn't harsh. But it was final. And in that moment, surrounded by the very world he had chosen over her, Daniel understood something he had been too blind to see before. He hadn't just lost her. He had underestimated her. The room was still watching. Not because of Daniel anymore, but because of her. Elena stood in the center of it all, calm and composed, as quiet admiration replaced the whispers that once doubted her. There was no need for her to prove anything, no need to explain who she was or what she had become. It was already clear. Daniel looked at her, the weight of his choices finally visible in his eyes. Elena, we should talk, he said, a hint of urgency in his voice. There are things I didn't understand before. She studied him for a brief moment, not with anger, not with pain, but with a kind of distant understanding. I know, she replied softly. That was all. No accusations. No long speeches. No attempt to revisit the past. Because she wasn't there to fix what had already been broken. For a second, it seemed like he wanted to say more, perhaps an apology, perhaps something deeper. But the words never came. Or maybe they came too late. Elena gave a small, polite nod, the kind one offers to a stranger rather than someone who once meant everything. I hope your evening goes well, she said. Simple. Graceful. Final. And then, she turned away. There was no hesitation in her movement, no lingering glance behind her. Each step she took was steady, confident, and completely free of the weight she once carried. The same room that had once made her feel invisible now watched her leave with silent admiration. Not because she demanded attention, but because she had earned it without asking. Daniel remained where he was, unable to follow, unable to speak. For the first time, he truly understood what he had lost. Not just a wife, not just a partner, but a woman who had once given him everything without expecting anything in return. And now, she needed nothing from him. Elena walked past the grand doors, the soft lights fading behind her as she stepped into the quiet night. The air felt different, lighter, freer. This time, she wasn't leaving in silence because she had been dismissed. She was leaving because she had chosen herself. Her return had never been about revenge. It was something far more powerful than that. She hadn't come back to make him regret losing her. She had come back as a woman who had already moved beyond him. A woman who no longer needed to be seen. Because she finally saw her own worth.